Thank you. So, hands up who's struggled as a listener at times in their life. Okay, Emily, maybe you're a little bit slower to get there. Maybe you're less of a struggler than the rest of us. However, I would say that this is one of the skills which is, strangely enough, what we use close to all day, every day, and yet, other than being told in school, listen, I don't think that there was much in the way of explicit exploration of what listening is, or the importance of it, or how we can cultivate it, let alone an exploration. Welcome, Emily and Tom. Let alone an exploration of different styles of listening. Like literally, in any moment, there are different perspectives that we are occupying, and each one of these perspectives is a form of listening. Yeah. So we're going to explore briefly today. We'll touch on there being 5 different levels of listening that we work with. But the real goal is something that might sound quite high, and that is for us to invite more reverence into the world. Now, this notion of revering things, of relating to things and people as sacred, is something that potentially has been lost to a great degree in this increasingly agnostic through atheistic world. And yet, in no way is the reverence that I'm talking about something that comes from only religion. It comes from looking at someone or something with our total presence and being there with complete curiosity. For those of you who have ever looked at a little baby, like Rafa, who's got a fresh little baby in the world right now, he's just over there, huh? Yeah, nice. And when you look at this little soul, for many of us, when we stare at something so beautiful, so sweet, and so innocent, it evokes this heart-opening response. There is a quality of reverence that can be there, and timelessness can come into the space. Welcome, Michael. This to me, this quality of reverence is something that we're actually all yearning for. We're yearning, in a sense, for the eyes of wonder that we may have experienced when we're young, or when we experience in rare moments. And they don't need to be so rare. So I don't want to say they're rare for you. Perhaps they are not. Perhaps you find yourself in some kind of awe often. I had a very good friend. I had a very good friend. I haven't talked to him for quite some years. I still count him as a good friend, though, who talked about being a member of the Church of Perpetual Astonishment. This idea that everything and anything can be astonishing when we are utterly absorbed in it, with or without drugs. Absolutely. We can be absolutely in awe and see things as magnificent purely by being utterly present to them. So there's 3 things that I'm really going to be touching on today. And the first is respect. And the second is presence. And the third is benevolence. Emily, in French, I've been hearing people talk very often. You know, I've been only engaging with the French-speaking world again for the last year of my life after an absence of like 2 decades or more. And something that I was really happy to find was how often people use the word bienveillance. And at first I was kind of struggling to find the equivalent, but I realized it's benevolence. But we in English don't talk about benevolence very often. You know, we talk about kindness, which is in the same kind of space, but we don't talk about this kind regard, the bienveillance, looking with a kind regard. And it's the same with benevolence. And so what I'm putting forward is that when we can listen to people with respect, with presence, and with benevolence, we will come to something that I will call reverence. So let's start with respect. And let me start with you guys. Now, if you've heard me define respect before, let's pass you by and see if we can get somebody else. Don't give that same one. You can give your own definitions. But what does respect mean to you? And so there is no right or wrong. I'm going to give my own definition in a little, but I would love to hear from you. What does respect mean to you? And you're welcome to give societal definitions of it too. Accept the other one. Yeah, to accept somebody. Yeah. And feel free, of course, to put up your hand and or to unmute yourself, because I'd love to hear your voices. We're going to get a lot of mine. I'd be very happy to hear yours. Giving your full presence. Thank you. Thank you, Megan. Yeah, that to me is a key element of it. One definition that was given to me by somebody once upon a time is giving our best behavior and our highest level of presence. Put those two things together and you will be respectful. Yeah. I'm going to offer an alternate definition though, which I think is very important, especially at this time where many people are in lockdown or semi-lockdown, and therefore having a lot of contact with various people, maybe having phone calls with the same people again and again. Like me and my dad, we generally talk to each other once every few weeks. This last week, we talked 5 out of 7 days. That's unheard of for me and him to talk with each other just so often. Now, the meaning that I'm going to go for is very often I like to go to etymology to ferret out different meanings on things. And the word or the prefix re means again or afresh. And the spect part of respect comes from to see, beautiful, approaching somebody with curiosity, to see them as they are. Now that is exactly what this is talking about. So with this re component of respect, it's to see with a fresh eyes. So that means to see somebody anew. So the opposite of respect then is to take who somebody was yesterday, plant it in front of us today, and then ensure that they're still going to have that relationship to us tomorrow. Now, what that means is, who here has changed since they left home when they were a child? Yeah, we've changed in various key ways. And yet, when we go home, if we get related to like we're still the little boy or the little girl that we were, it's very easy to feel like we are not being respected. We are not being seen afresh. We are not being seen as we are. We're still being related to as an idea rather than as a living being right here, right now, always open to reinvention. I like to relate to myself as a field of possibility. I could be quiet, I could be loud. I could be introverted, I could be extroverted. I could be like this, I could be like that, but I would like to find out here and now, not have yesterday define who I am today. Does that make sense? Yeah. I love you, James. Yeah. So it makes a lot of sense to me because one, I see how I was doing that to my own parents for so long. I would use words like, my mum is always, my dad is always. In my relationships, I would say, you never, you always. I would use these definitive statements that were sourced in the past to define who somebody is today. And yet I wouldn't want them to do that to me. Yeah, so these these little boy words, yeah, little boy, little girl words, these kids' words in a certain sense that can be very aggravating and very difficult for people to deal with when they're thrown at them. Now, what I want to put forward is that if we want to bring respect into our relationships, we need to open the door on the possibility that the people that we are communicating with are not known. We don't know who they are. We are finding out in this moment. Now, that does not mean we can't learn from the past and recognize, oh, okay, that could be a trigger issue for somebody and so on. I'm not saying throw out the whole past and don't give respect to that. No worries ever. Love you, darling. See you soon. Now, but what I am saying is that if we are willing to open up these doors of possibility, we just may find that the people that we think we know are so much more than what we thought they were. That they're capable of so much greater wisdom, that they are capable of being able to enrich us, to be able to round out our blind spots in ways that we didn't realize they could before. But it starts with this willingness to go, fresh moment. No, like right now, I'm looking at you, Tom. We've known each other for a couple of years. I'm going, okay, what does it mean for me to, in a sense, let go and start afresh and see you with the fresh eyes of going, wow, who is this person? And when I come to any of these relationships that I have here with you and let go of a previous context, it doesn't mean that the context disappears. It means rather that we are able to invite in the fresh and the new. So the first principle that I'm putting forward for us to love with our listening is to especially come back to the people that you've known over time, your parents if they're still alive, your family members, brothers and sisters, your partners and your old friends, and to hold the possibility that you don't know them as well as you thought you did, and that they are a mysterious curiosity that you can see with fresh eyes or hear with fresh ears, which is more on the money for what we're talking about today. Yeah? So we start there with respect. Do people get that? Does that jive for you, that definition of respect, the willingness to see people afresh, to hear people afresh? Yeah? So the next is to be present. Yeah? Now, when we talk about communication, communication means to make common. You see commune, common, it's the same word. And so the act of communication means to make a meaning common. Now, to be able to receive meaning, we need to be here, and yet often we're not. Now, one of the barriers to communication is noise. And those of you who have already worked with a bit, and there's a few of you who are here, you know we've talked about noise before as outer noise and inner noise. Yeah, noise which is outside of us, such as a truck going past or traffic or a baby crying, as the case may be, Rafa. Sometimes we find our conversations when we've got little ones can be like, there's a piece of the conversation, then the outer noise gets too strong, and then we have the next piece of the conversation once the outer noise has gone down. Now, whilst outer noise is a thing, and a super legitimate one when you've got a little one or when you live next to a highway, inner noise is the one that I'm really wanting to focus on. So what do you find gets in the way of you hearing people? I've already pushed us in a certain direction, but is there anyone who's willing to share how they make it difficult for themselves to hear other people? Any examples? I'm very happy to share with you my own personal examples. Thank you, Megan.
I guess it's trying to block out my own stories. So going, oh yeah, like, trying to jump in with my own stuff because I'm trying to listen to them. And that's been a big thing of mine my whole life. Yeah.
And it can feel like we're trying to add something, yeah? You can feel like I want to give something. And yet sometimes, and stay unmuted, can I just ask you, when you're there and you're excited about sharing what you want to share, can you sometimes miss what the person's actually saying?
100%. Yeah. Because you're just thinking of what, oh yeah, I've got this and I'm just going to, quickly jump in with this, but you just completely, you're in your own head. Yeah.
And so something that was going in a particular direction could get derailed and taken in another direction. The person could go, actually, that's not what I was saying at all. And instead of feeling contributed to, feel somehow offended that you weren't actually just going with them. And have you ever found on this front that when you put that story to the side and just stay present, that story actually wasn't so important only 15 seconds later?
True.
Yeah.
True.
Sometimes it feels like I've got to get this out or otherwise, but then we just come back, we're here and it's gone. and suddenly we're still and we're peaceful again. And that thing that felt like it was so very pressing is no longer. Welcome, Leela. Really good to see you, darling. So, so, so one of the things that comes up is thinking that what we are thinking is really important to say. Maybe your egos won't like to hear this, mine doesn't. And that is, what you have to say is not nearly as important as what the person is sharing with you in that moment. If they're incomplete with their share, then what they're sharing is still the topic. So there can be a battle for airtime. Why do we get into this battle for airtime with one another? Go for it, James. I see you, Rafa, sharing something
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
This is from a new book which I actually have in front of me called The Advice Trap by Michael Bonnet-Sanier. And he says that the whole point of listening is to really train yourself to stay curious for longer
Yes.
than the voices in your head are telling you. And
Yes.
they could come from three aspects, which I think is really great. The need to tell something, in other words, maybe I can tell that, I want to be clever. The need to save somebody when the first words that come out of their head is what you latch on to. And then the need to control a situation as well. And I find that a really lovely framework in which to think about shutting up, basically, and listening.
Is it fair to say that all three of those are egoic desires? The desire to tell and be seen in a certain light. What was the second one, sorry?
To save.
Yeah, to save.
Somebody in a
so to see oneself as that hero of sorts, saving the other. And the third one?
Control.
Control. Yeah.
I feel uncomfortable about what this person is saying. I have to dive in.
Yeah. And the ego is very uncomfortable in the space of the unknown because it may be changed. Its id entity, the identity that is only held together by staying the same over time, could, without control, actually crumble. So listening is actually a courageous action. Do we have the courage to stop and listen? That's awesome. Thank you so much, James. That's a really nice build on that. So I'm putting forward. Sorry, no, but you're the ever learner who is studiously going about continuing to think about what are the important things in life and gathering them together. If you're ever wanting good resources on things, James is a great man to go to, as well as if you're ever wanting a jukebox full of songs appropriate for any occasion. So coming back to presence, what does it mean to be present? I'd really love to hear your voices in relation to this because it brings us present to something. All perspectives are beautiful. Yeah, Leela, what's presence to you?
The first word that comes up is aliveness.
Yes.
So like you're being alive to someone or something.
Very good. Now, if we can talk about death as being not so present, we're not so present to what's going on, at least not that we know of definitively, then perhaps it's opposite of being fully alive is as close as we can get in some ways to saying that's what it is to be present. Yet, what are we alive to? Why I say that is that we can be very alive to only our own emotions and only our own thoughts. So what does it mean to have an expanded circle of presence that encompasses, yeah, go for it, Rafa.
Yes, feeling within and then feeling without. And that brings the totality of the environment that you're in or the space that you're currently sharing, whether that's with just one person, taking full presence of them or presence of a whole room and space.
Yes, indeed. In fact, the word present, we can see in the SENT, it literally means, it's like sentiment. It's from feeling, sentir en français, you know, it's to feel. And so to be present, in a certain sense, it means to be forward feeling, to be leaning into feeling. Yeah. which is kind of beautiful.
Yeah, alive to that feeling, that the presently, you know, and
Indeed.
that tells you everything you need to know.
I love to talk about, in terms of these fields of awareness, I have this weird word that I call trans into intra. And so this is the intrapersonal. So building on what you're saying there, Rafa, aware of our feelings at the intrapersonal level, aware of others' feelings at the interpersonal level, and aware of the atmosphere itself, aware of the context itself at a transpersonal level. Can we feel each one of these contexts or each one of these different perspectives simultaneously? So here we are, and I'm really liking something that's emerging for me with James talking on curiosity, and I think, Emily, you said something to do with curiosity earlier as well. So we've got curiosity here. We've got this feeling, or what I might call sensitivity. With curiosity, it comes from the same root as care, curiosity, if you will. So to be caring in a feeling way. So part of our being present asks us to be very curious, yeah, and very feeling, very alive. Now, let's move on to this next one, which is benevolence. What does it mean to you, this word, benevolence? To define it in French, Emily, we're talking about bienveillance. It's the same thing. Yeah. And, you know, so we can talk about it as unconditional positive regard. We can talk about it as kindness or care. Is there anybody who would be willing to share for them what it means to be benevolent? Or you could even illustrate it by sharing about somebody that you know, who you think of as being very benevolent. Yeah, Justin, thank you.
Yeah, I've always attributed benevolence to kings and queens.
Yes.
There's an element of care of the land and the realm around someone with benevolence. So in a one-on-one, it's the choice that I'm making to take care of not only of what's happening with the person, but also just like the wider scope of things that are happening. And there's an element of personal responsibility to what's happening and taking care of it.
Mm. I like it. I like it. Taking responsibility for what you can, yeah, and exerting your responsibility inside of that. And I love how you brought in this next level in terms of the archetypal element of coming from a sovereign self, because the sovereign takes unconditional responsibility. The sovereign does their best to live their life, not just for themselves, but the kingdom as a whole. Yeah. So there is a quality of care that we can bring to people through our listening, by looking at them, by relating to them with this unconditional positive regard, with this care, with this sense of responsibility for their well-being. Now, hands up who can be an impatient listener. Very good. Thank you for your honesty, people. So in a certain sense, all of these things hinge on the notion that not only can we be patient, but perhaps there's nowhere else that is better to be. It's very difficult to listen well when we're telling ourselves if they would just get on with it. Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that there is not a place to be able to share with people, I think I've understood what you said, and paraphrase, and to be able to support people to move from one point onto another point as something maybe being labored. However, I am putting forward that there is something which is much better than reality TV. It's called humans. They're absolutely fascinating when we're engrossed in them. There's something else, which is that when we're impatient, we'll often find that our central nervous system feels a bit tense. Yeah. So what can we do to invite in patience, or going deeper, acceptance? Going deeper, presence. We can breathe. Yeah, we can breathe. I say this often, and I often say it feeling a little bit concerned that I enjoy saying it so much, but please be present to your asshole. It's really hard to be uptight when your bum hole is relaxed. It's right down at the depths. It's like, if you're there right now, I'm imagining you're starting to feel your bum hole more as I talk about it. And as you do, chances are that you can notice that it has little like moments where it jitters in some kind of way, or it can be absolutely relaxed. It might sound kind of dirty to listen through your bum hole, but I am putting forward that if you were there and my basal chakra, mate, baby, that's right. So if you can get down to your base chakra, down to your muladhara, and relax through your perineum whilst you're listening to somebody, there will be more of you available to love them. If we've talked about, Rafa, before, presence is to feel fully. And then to feel fully means to feel fully. It means to occupy and live in, to inhabit this whole body. Now, we've got arms and legs, and these limbs of ours we can also occupy too. At the same time as that, so much of what we experience on the emotional, energetic level takes place in this torso. For many of us, as Negan said earlier, we can find ourselves fixated on the stories which are upstairs in our neural activity, and lose awareness of what's going on down at the deeper levels of our soma, our living body. And yet, this whole being, this whole body is your brain. A brain is not just this neural activity that happens up here. This interprets what is taking place through the system as a whole. And so if we want to listen fully to somebody, let us begin with listening to ourselves right here and now, and offer ourselves. Because if we're just there focusing on listening to that person and divorced from what's going on with ourselves in a relaxed way, they will feel that as intensity rather than sensitivity, rather than presence. So there's something beautiful we can invite into the space purely by feeling ourselves fully. And I say it jokingly, you know, be an asshole, but I mean it. What I mean by it is, I mean, be alive down to the depths of your being when you're with somebody, and there will be more of you to love them. More than if you're up in only your head, more than if you're only breathing down to your chest, more than if you're just into your belly. There will be as deep as you can go inside of this core of who you are, being offered to this person unconditionally. Yeah. So right now, let's just play out a couple of experiments. To begin with, just look at somebody on the screen. And now see what happens when you look at that same person and think in your mind, may you be happy. Repeat it to yourself, may you be happy. Now what's happening, guys? What's happening? All right, now we'll come out into conversation. What changed between look at somebody and bring in the intention of benevolence, of wishing for that person's happiness? Did you notice a shift inside of yourself? And if so, what? Go explain that to us in words, Rafa. There.
A brightening of the energy going across, and a brightening of the energy being received, and that then is a widening of the feeling field, you know, the perception of feeling, and then putting that intention of bright, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be, really.
Can I ask, who were you looking at?
Emily, and I don't know Emily.
Emily, who were you looking at?
Me?
Yeah.
I was looking at Tom.
Is it that Emily you were looking at, or the other Emily?
That one, yes.
Yeah.
Hello, Emily.
So why I asked that is that you were looking at somebody who wasn't even looking at you, and just by looking at that person, so it doesn't even need to be that the person is giving us back that same energy for us to be able to feel that person in that certain kind of way. I won't deny that there is something beautiful about looking at a smiling face. Yeah. However, what I will say is that there is something kind of spooky and beautiful about you going, may you be happy. And the very person that you were thinking it about wasn't even looking back at you inside of the exercise. They're looking at somebody else inside of the exercise. What I'm really wanting to plant the seed of is that to love with our listening, one thing we can do is we can affirm who that person is to us by sending a prayer, by sending an intention towards that person. We can look at this person, and you know, one of the things that I very often have been practicing the last couple of years is, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be loved. Now, of course, that does not need to be said for it to be experienced. We can have an attitude of benevolence. That can be a breath, that can be a space. So we don't need to interrupt the flow of what they're saying and say, just a moment, may you be happy, may you be well, may you be loved. Okay, now speak to me. We can just remember what is the space that we come from as we are listening to somebody. What I like to think of it as a father myself, a couple of years ago, my children were learning to walk, and it was such a pleasure. And I still have this experience in so many ways all of the time. But when I would see them walking, I never had the thing of like, when I would see them fall down, go, what's wrong with you? That was not the thought coming through my head. I was like, good go, give it another go. I was on their side, wishing the best for them at every step. And we can have that same attitude of grace, or that same attitude of benevolence to other people, rather than being frustrated by seeing somebody doing their best to communicate themselves. We can have the attitude of, yes, thank you, you're doing your best, I'm here for you. As Thich Nhat Hanh says with one of his mantras, darling, I'm here for you. Yeah. So this is one thing that we can bring, is an attitude of being on their side and wishing the best from them as a communicator. Does this make sense, guys? Yeah. This is better than patience. This is more of a state of grace that we can bring to the people that we want to love in this way. Now, something that many of you here have practiced before, which you can either do overtly or you can do covertly, but that is to set yourself times of committing to not speaking to the person who, not responding verbally to the person who's speaking to you. So literally going into a conversation with somebody, reminding yourself, listen. Just, that's the little bit of coaching to yourself, is just to remind yourself, listen well. And then inside of that, we can, obviously, it's not to say listen and then freeze, and now you're no longer there and you're holding your breath. Stay alive, allow yourself to moan and grunt and hum and aha, and all of those non-verbal cues that lets the person know that you are a living being that's being touched by what they're saying. However, focusing on allowing the conversation to come from them. Another way that we can build on that is to go listen or questions. And that means instead of giving a response, we listen or we ask further questions. And now we're back into the space of listening. Yeah? Because if we listen and respond, I understand paraphrasing and the power of paraphrasing, and I'm not saying not to do it, definitely not. I'm just saying that if we're training ourselves in listening, one of the things we can do is we can listen for the question that is being asked to be asked, so to speak, listen for the question that is seeking to emerge, and then listen again. Yeah, so the key here is to remind ourselves to listen. And again, we take a breath. Yeah. So, another thing. So we want to listen. We're going to reorient us to our breath again. Now, I want you to again focus on somebody on the screen. Marcus, Michael, Jade, if you can see us on the screen here, then please just focus on whoever you can see there. Please don't focus on Marcus, Michael, or Jade, because you're not going to be able to see their breath. Yeah. Before you could have focused on their name and smiled at their name. That would have been kosher. But for now, what we're going to do is you're going to look at somebody. You may want to pin that person and make them larger on your screen. So you can go and you'll see like there's the 3 dots and you can pin that video. And so right now I'm looking at a particular person. It's you, Justin. And so with that, I'm going to be focusing on your breath to the best of my ability, sensing your breath. The practice is breathe their breath. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're listening by breathing the other person's breath. So we're just going to spend around 30 seconds or so focusing on this person and allowing our breath as best as possible to be breathed by the other person, to be moved by the other person. And let's go. Thank you for breathing me, Justin. So with that, I'm coming back into my gallery view. I'm not sure what you touched on there. Did anybody have an experience of their breath being altered by the person that they were watching? Hands up if you did. Yeah. So that is a way that we can go straight to empathy. If we're wanting to feel what the person is feeling, we can go deeper than words. We can go to their breath, the space in which those words are arising. They're arising from a feeling, breathing being. And if we are willing to, we can allow our breath to be touched by. Yeah. If their breath is hyperventilation, we may not want to do it for long. So, you know, if they're doing you might want to just go, okay, I'll let that touch me for a moment and come back to my more relaxed form of breathing. But it's a way to attune and align that brings us to a deeper level of listening, because we are obviously not just listening to content, we are listening to essence and allowing ourselves to be touched by that living, breathing essence. So this is something else that we can work with. It makes sense, guys? Yeah, I hope so. All right, so with the bit of time that we've got left, I know that some of you have been through this before, so please excuse me if you're like, especially you, Leila, if you're like, oh, okay, I know this stuff. But I want to make sure that we're aware of these different modes and styles of listening and what is available to us across this spectrum. So we work with what we call 5 levels of listening. And the first one is non-listening. I don't know if anyone has experienced much in the way of indifferent listening, but it looks something like this. Yeah, it looks something like being engaged in this. Yeah. No, I heard you. I heard you. And actually having our attention elsewhere. But it doesn't just look like that. It can also look like us going deeply inside of ourselves and we're holding on to something and we will not let the other person's thoughts or feelings through. We're too full of our own content. The cup is too full to be able to pour anything else into it. Yeah. And in that space of indifference, it's actually, it can be quite violent. It can feel like self-protection at times. And so I don't want to negate that. If you've got any relationships where people are throwing certain things at you and you feel like you're needing to protect yourself by maintaining some kind of psychic distance or wall, that's your sovereign choice, and I understand why we would make such a choice. However, I do want to say that, imagine this. Anyone ever seen a child pulling on a parent's leg and the parent not paying attention to them throughout a long conversation? Have you ever seen that? If you imagine yourself as that same little child, and like I do the same thing with my own kids at times. I'm in the middle of something, or I might have a story, oh, this is rude, the way they're going about it. I won't say I do my best at all times, but I do my best globally to acknowledge them and reorient as gracefully as possible. However, imagine being that little child and they are pulling for years after years, saying, please notice me. And in a sense, we're saying, no, I've got better things to do. And that's what can happen when we are saying to somebody else, you're not as important to me as this. You're not as important to me as this thought that I've got going on up here. Yeah. So I say that because when we're indifferent, it can seem very blasé or inconsequential, but it does have a real consequence, because indifference is the opposite of love. If love is connection and care, and indifference is disconnection and lack of care, we can see that that's more or less the opposite of love there. At least in some kind of spiteful conversation, two egos are connecting with each other. At least there's something being thrown back and forth. Not that I'm saying, please now argue and be really bad to one another. I am saying, though, let's be aware that we can be indifferent in our listening and that it can have real consequences, especially when it's over time. Here's another form of indifferent listening: not being in touch with the people that we care for and that care for us over a long period of time. Certain relationships, we can show indifference and it can land as a lack of interest. Even though if you knew that that person was dying, you would know they'd be one of the most important people in the world for you to be there for. So again, each of you have your own relationships and the ways to navigate them. And as I said to you before, my father and I generally only talk to each other every few weeks. And that tends to be a comfortable and good dynamic for two people who really love each other. And that's the nature of our connection. So I'm in no position to say, call your mum every day. No, I'm just here to say that if we are indifferent over time, that can also land in a certain way. Now, if we're engaging with people, the next form or the next level of listening that we talk about is prejudicial listening. And that means listening to people through the lens of judgment. So we're engaging with what they're saying, but consistently referring it to what we already know. Perhaps with an attitude of defensiveness, of self-protection. Yeah. So has anybody here got any stories about their parents? I always like to ask about parents because that's the one which most people have. And what I mean by stories is a fixed view of your parents. Anyone got a fixed view of their parents? I've definitely had fixed views of my parents. Thank you for the brave souls who are willing to put up their hands in relation to that one. And the rest of you, congratulations on your enlightenment, which is a wonderful thing. Yeah, and don't mean to demean it if that's the case, and that's brilliant. Thank you, James. Now, when we are listening to somebody through a fixed view, through prejudging them, it's very hard to hear them. Our mind is narrow. Our heart has a certain level of contraction to it. And so the second invitation in terms of loving through our listening in these levels of listening conversation. So the first one is, don't be indifferent. Try to be there. When you're there, don't be closed-minded. be open-minded. Yeah? Don't be closed heart, be open heart. Now, if we are open-minded, we start there. Let's open our minds. We don't need to open our hearts yet. Let's get to the next level though. And to do that, we can open our minds. And this is what we call objective listening. Objective listening means that we are willing to love somebody in terms of being open to new information they bring us. That we are willing to see things in a different way because they are rounding out our perspective. So we have an open mind. Yeah? So for example, someone might, you know, once upon a time, those of you who are from Australia, you'll all know John Howard. And James, you're probably aware of John Howard. And he was our Prime Minister from the day that I could vote until I was almost 30. He was our Prime Minister. I found that very difficult. Yet, once upon a time, when I was working at the Sydney Opera House, he arrived at the Sydney Opera House as I was coming out of it, and I saw him come out of a car, and he saw a woman, I don't remember her name, I'll call her Betsy, and he says, "Hey, Betsy, how are you?" And she goes, "Hey, John," and they literally ran towards each other and hugged each other. Now, if somebody told me that, if I had an open mind, I might have gone, okay, he's not just the whatever judgments I had about him, he's also a caring and heartful human being, because it would be new data. So it would open the way that I could see them. Yeah, so this is that next level. We have an open mind. We allow new information to come in and change our perspective. Next level. So now we're getting to the fourth level. We can love people by having an open heart. And that means listening to them with feeling. So we're not just listening to the content and seeing things from a new perspective, but we're allowing our emotions to be engaged. We're allowing their emotions to be important to us. Perhaps we still have a spaciousness around us that we don't get, in a certain sense, contracted into their contraction. So we can have an open sky space in terms of still feeling somebody. Yeah. It doesn't help somebody for us to join them in misery. More than misery loves company, misery loves presence and care from somebody who has still got their own center. But we allow ourselves to feel. At the same time, we allow ourselves to feel. So this is a fourth level of listening. We've gone beyond indifference. We might be aware of our prejudice, our judgments, but we let them go. We are able to take in new information with an open mind, and we now have an open heart. Yeah? At the final level of the listening, and this goes infinitely deep and expansive on each one of those levels up to now. At the final level, we call this generative or creative listening. And this is where we have an open will. And what this means is that our own direction, our own desire in life can be influenced by the other person. What we want can be influenced by the other and their desires. This does not mean being a martyr. It does not mean being, oh, forget what I want and it's only about pleasing the other person. It means that our will is open now to come from us, to come from them, to come from the relationship. We are listening for the evolutionary impulse. What is the way of being or acting or speaking that will serve love, that will serve the evolutionary impulse? Yeah? We are no longer indifferent, we are caring. We are no longer blind to our prejudices or judgments. We see them clearly. Perhaps they're a source of humor. We're no longer got any closedness of mind. We are able to take in new information. We are no longer closed in any way in our heart or emotions. We are willing to feel fully. And with all of that data, we are willing to be influenced by. We are willing to have our desires, our directionality influenced by the other person. Our will is open too. So if we're wondering how we can love with our listening, if we're willing to see people with fresh eyes, be present, practice an unconditional positive regard of benevolence, and then ensure that we are going deeper with our levels of listening to have an open mind, an open heart, and an open will, we will be there for people in such a way that they will feel our care. They will feel that love. So with these minutes that we've got now, what I'd like us to do, what I'm always really keen on in these times, is for us to pay it forward. You know, we've just created what I would hope for us has been a fun and interesting exploration of one of life's core aspects, which is listening, being there for others. And with that, I always feel blessed to, whether it's in the listening of or the speaking of or whatever it is, the exploration of this kind of content, I feel very grateful for it, because once upon a time, I was a very desperate and broken person. Thank you, James. And it was distinctions such as this that helped me to let go of my closure, my constriction, at least to the degree that I have now. Not saying that there isn't still elements of that that are part of who I am today. However, one of the key things that I loved over time was when I was in spaces like this and people said, so what do we do with that? How do we take it out of the cave and into the world? How do we take this and offer it as a gift? And so my request is, for the next minute, I would like you to write an intuitive list of who are the people that are most important to you. Max it out at around somewhere between 5 and 10. But just write a list of the 5 to 10 people who are most important to you. They could be friends, family, colleagues, clients, whatever the nature is of the different relationships you have. Partner. And whomever you've got there, it's no measure of actually whether they are the most important people to you, because in another moment, maybe other people will have come on that list. It's just who you wrote right now. What my invitation is for you to choose one or more, but to choose one and go into your next conversation with them to love them with your listening, to bring that to mind. For those of you who already know this practice, the present listening practice, you could even invite that person to speak with you and say, I want to practice listening to you. I want to practice really listening deeply. And so I'm wondering if you'd be willing to speak with me about whatever you're feeling and thinking about at the moment. And I'll just be here and just listen. I'll respond by nodding my head or by humming or whatever it is to let you know that I'm with you. But I'm not going to speak because I really want to practice being the best listener possible. That is entirely a legitimate and beautiful thing to do. And for those of you who have, that you're living in a house with somebody right now during this time, hey, there's much worse times to be able to spend your time than to say to the person, I want to love you by listening to you as deeply as possible. What do you think about us taking 15 to 20 minutes and you just share with me whatever's alive in you? And if you feel to be silent, I'll continue to listen to your silence. And if you have something to share, I'll listen to what you have to share. And if there are judgments about me, I'll do my best to hear you without having reactivity. I'll just be here. You know, that is a beautiful thing for us to offer somebody. Beyond that, beyond either creating that or just sending an intention to listen to somebody, I invite all of us to come out from this space on the other side and be present to the quality of listening that we have and focus on seeing people with fresh eyes, being present, and having kind hearts. And if we can do those things, I actually think that that is the kind of thing that can transform the world. Deep listening to one another. And so for today, everybody, that's what I've got for us. We've got like just a couple of minutes. If there's anything that anyone would like to share in relation to what we've been through, or if you're just wanting to say goodbye to the other beautiful people on the screen, I invite you to unmute yourself now and yeah, either speak or Emily, is there something you want to share, or are you just wanting to say goodbye?
Just say goodbye. Just get myself prepared for a big goodbye.
Good to see you, Jade. So yeah, if everyone, oh, thank you, James. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that, backing everything you've said in the last 2 minutes, just to say what a healing force that presence, that respect, that benevolent attitude can be in the world. I've experienced it recently myself, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm really glad to hear that. So with that, yeah, please unmute yourself just so that everyone can hear each other's cacophony of voices. And as I said to people who were here earlier, again, the one choice we've got is where we spend our time, the time that we've got. And thank you so much for spending it here together. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Caro.